What do you call a dinosaur car accident? A Tyrannosaurus wreck. But seriously, what if dinosaurs hadn't been destroyed in a cosmic accident and invented cars and other technology? The 19th century was an amazing time to be in any of the fields that spent their time digging up fields looking to expand our knowledge of Earth and its past. And one of the highlights of that was the growing discovery of fossils from ancient and giant lizards. People came from all around to view the wired-together skeletons of these mighty and terrible extinct monsters, helping fund many of our natural history museums and inspiring some of the most fascinating tales of science fiction and fantasy. From the outset, people wondered what could have ended the story of these giant dinosaurs, and the early theories ranged from their eggshells being too thin, or the ice ages wiping them out, to them just being too big and aggressive for Noah to get on his ark. About the time I was born, though, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Luis Alvarez, his son and geologist Walter Alvarez, and chemists Frank Acero and Helen von Michael discovered a sedimentary layer with a very high concentration of iridium which could be found all over the world. This is when the asteroid extinction hypothesis gained traction, though it's been suggested at least as early as the 1950s. The evidence then was hardly conclusive yet, but the reasoning goes as follows. Iridium is rare in Earth's crust, but common in meteorites, while volcanoes can distribute it too. Iridium is rare in our crust compared to asteroids because it tends to sink, and our original iridium supply on a once molten Earth sank towards the core. Even when it comes up in volcanoes, it's pretty minimal. So we assume most of ours came from space, but gets sprinkled around as smaller objects hit, as opposed to one giant rock. We've learned more about both since then, and the evidence better matched asteroids, as did later evidence, but when I was a kid this was all the new rage, along with debates about it and other competing theories. Even today, the asteroid hypothesis is not without its opponents, and the chain of events causing the actual extinction is still murky, as opposed to the general public notion, especially at the time, that an asteroid impacted and almost every dinosaur species died off then or within a season or two. Remembering the era, I think for a lot of folks it was a grim parallel to the possibility of ICBMs going off and a nuclear winter following. We'll discuss some of the other evidence and alternate theories today, but our focus is more on what would happen if that extinction had not occurred, and of course to do that we need to know why it did occur. As an example, science fiction has often enjoyed imagining that dinosaurs might have evolved into a civilization and developed technology and wiped themselves out. The words used in popular accounts of the extinction of dinosaurs often unintentionally evoke this imagery. It's common to read phrases such as fallen kingdom or the end of an empire. And if we imagine an alien species instead came by and did the job, then maybe it was with a redirected asteroid, or maybe they just liked using iridium on their impactor shells for orbital bombardments or RKMs. Given that hostile aliens, or some hostile branch of space-faring dinosaurs, would presumably be building their munitions for interplanetary attacks from resources in space, not dragging them up a gravity well, it would not be peculiar for those weapons to leave the same sorts of traces as an asteroid would, since they'd have been built from them. I'm very skeptical of both aliens visiting Earth in the past and any prior pre-human civilizations on Earth, but in and of itself, that iridium layer equally supports both natural and artificial attacks from space. The idea that dinosaurs or some other pre-human civilization might have existed on Earth is also a popular one, and one we explored more in depth in our episode on the Silurian hypothesis. The basic notion is that advanced technology is generally relatively intricate and fragile compared to, say, a giant pyramid made of slabs of stone. Thus it won't weather well over millions of years, and neither will most stone constructs, basically erasing the evidence of prior civilizations. I dispute the idea, as I would expect us to have dug up a lot of right angles, as we tend to even leave those in the soils of fields we work a lot, let alone the millions of basement foundations and millions of miles of road we've built. Nonetheless, it's a fun topic, and even if it's more science fiction than science, it's a good and legitimate science discussion to have, as are alternate theories to an asteroid for that extinction. But the body of evidence for an asteroid has been growing, particularly with the discovery of the Chicxulub crater. This is an impact crater 120 miles or 200 kilometers wide, and 12 miles or 20 kilometers deep, buried underneath the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Argon dating puts the impact between 66 million to 66.1 million years ago. It is thought to have struck with the force of 72 million megaton nuclear devices, many thousands of times more destructive than our entire Cold War nuclear arsenal. As huge as that energy sounds, roughly 300 billion trillion joules, it's about 3 times the energy Earth gets from the Sun each week, and is likely far weaker than many early asteroids that struck Earth during its more formative days, and time has probably erased easy evidence of their existence. It's also the second largest confirmed crater we have. There's one in South Africa that is a little bit bigger, which we date to about 2 billion years ago, and another one just a bit smaller in Ontario, Canada, that's also about 2 billion years old. But we have found quite a few other craters that are on the same order of magnitude, including one that landed in Siberia just 36 million years ago, and at least 4 others that impacted during the era of dinosaurs. So we want to emphasize that this wasn't a singular event, and as terribly destructive as it was the climate change afterward that probably punched most critters' tickets. And it was hardly just dinosaurs, most other tetrapods the size of a dog or bigger went extinct. Tetrapods are 4-legged vertebrates like dogs or you and I, and some dinosaurs did survive. In a situation like that, big critters suffer because they are just fewer in number and have a harder time scrounging up food and finding other survivor nearby to repopulate with. Now, the exception to that, and the biggest blow to the Silurian hypothesis applying to intelligent dinosaurs, is that we ourselves could survive that as a species if it happened nowadays. The ash might have lingered for months or even years. I saw one study that argued you could have had a fine dust remain in the sky, causing a 15-year-long winter, but you could probably have started successfully farming again within a year, even if your viable locations and overall yields per location might be heavily decreased. And if most people died off, you could survive on a few pieces of good land and lower output that might linger for a few years. And that's assuming most of them died off in the aftermath and ate up supplies. If 99% of us fell over dead right now, the various canned and preserved foods we have would last the survivors decades. You would have to kill off more than 99% of us to even have an outside chance of causing a significant loss in technological knowledge. And the vast majority of folks left to themselves or in a small group would figure out that beacon fires were a very good way to find other people or inform them of your existence, once enough time passed that you no longer felt you needed to bunker up and hoard your food in favor of teaming up with others to grow more and rebuild stuff and breed people, which should not even be a year. We've discussed surviving apocalypses on this show before, see those episodes if you're interested, but the key point is that if dinosaurs had technology, they would have survived the event, assuming it was a natural one rather than some intentional act of mass murder. So we will assume going forward that contemplating their post-asteroid existence, which might have led to higher intelligence, isn't assuming they actually had it at the time of the event. The real discussion is if they would have evolved it at some point or if they would have prevented us evolving it, and we need to dismiss from the outset the idea that their brains were too small. As you probably know, they are the ancestors of birds, noted for being bird-brained with their small brain size. But as we noted in our recent episode, Alternative Intelligence, the other AI, birds are very smart, especially for their brain size. and that limitation on brain size is at least partially from a desire to minimize mass for flight, which obviously isn't much of a concern for several tons of walking murder machines like the T-Rex, which are even scarier since they apparently hunted in packs. And if you've got lots of mass and social behavior, bigger brains for reacting and communicating has some fairly clear advantages. And altering size is one of the easiest evolutionary steps, since it tends to vary anyway, and you just keep naturally selecting for larger. In this case, brain size. But body size would return quickly too. All the bigger critters die off initially, but within 5 million years we saw the rise of Bear Lambda, a horse-sized mammal much bigger than a human, and the Titanoboa emerged within 10 million years as the biggest snake we know of. Big critters weren't limited to newly emerging mammals. In addition to that snake, we saw the crocodile go through a lot of size changes, and environment changes too, with the Baronocercus being a land-dwelling crocodile that chased prey around ancient Venezuela, and certainly resembled a more classic dinosaur. Many smaller dinosaurs did survive as birds, and some did get quite big. The size of critters, mammals in particular, would keep rising till peaking out about halfway between now and that asteroid. So size can get reclaimed very fast in genetic terms, and nothing was stopping smaller lizards from returning to the T-Rex scale in that regard. And as I mentioned earlier, there were smaller if parallel asteroid impacts during their time on Earth too. This is where the what-if scenarios get tricky because we don't know that dinosaurs weren't already on their way out before that asteroid and just got the final shove from the event. There were a lot of factors. For instance, volcanic activity was up, and climate change appears to already have been kicking in before that asteroid. India was not connected to Asia at that time. It would crash into Asia and push up the Himalayan mountains more than 10 million years later. Nor was Asia connected to Europe or Africa. But in India, volcanic activity was on the rise for 2 million years before that asteroid, vomiting gases into the atmosphere. Many have suspected that big and non-avian dinosaurs were on their way out before the asteroid. Indeed, it's often been argued the asteroid was a minor overall factor. But there's other evidence indicating that T-Rex and Triceratops, at least, were thriving at the time of the impact. We should also be mindful that mammals were not some new thing that was just popping up back then, and all big critters were dinosaurs. Land animals began popping up sometime prior to 400 million years ago, but we don't see the rise of tetrapods, those critters with 4 limbs and vertebrae, onto land until after the Devonian mass extinction 360 million years ago. Unlike the asteroid impact, this extinction period lasted somewhere between 500,000 to 25 million years, and there are plenty of candidates, but little certainty as to the cause or causes. A lot of times it's not a single event that collapses things, be it ecosystem or civilizations or even a person's life, but as one of my sergeants liked to call it in the army, a reign of suck. Where multiple bad events occur, I tend to use catastrophe curve for when those events tend to be linked, like it's been an exhausting week of distracting crises and that leaves you ripe for vehicle accidents or getting into arguments or making other mistakes that fuel each other. After this extinction period, we see something called the amniotes split off from the amphibians, and these are the ancestors of us and the dinosaurs. From this came 2 major clades: sauropsids, meaning lizard face, that include all modern reptiles but also dinosaurs and birds, and synapsids, from which modern mammals claim descent. But that first mammal would not rise for another 100 million years and was quite tiny. Those were not the only synapsids though, and some got very large. Gorgonopsids were saber-toothed and bear-sized monsters that had arisen by 265 million years ago and is one of the 6 known major groups of therapsids, a clade of synapsids. Mammals do come from the therapsid clade, but from the more diverse and long-lasting cynodonts clade, not Gorgonopsia. But the key thing is that the giant synapsids were dominating that period, not the dinosaurs, till the Permian-Triassic extinction 250 million years ago. Up until then, the most abundant large critter was the Lystrosaurus, a pig-sized herbivore, which in spite of the name was a therapsid, not a reptile. Many suspect the cause of this extinction was in the oceans, because of the great loss in life there, and as the seafloor gets completely recycled every 200 million years, it would have erased any evidence, with volcanism being a popular culprit. You may be noticing a trend at this point. Mass extinctions happen a lot, and the dinosaurs were not really that much of an anomaly. They got our imagination and fascination for their size, but our knowledge of evolution, taxonomy, geology, and Earth's ancient history were very simplistic at that time. The Dino Killer event, 66 million years ago, is just the most recent of the Big Five extinction events, with the Triassic-Jurassic at 201 million years ago, the Permian-Triassic at 252, the Late Devonian at 372, and the Ordovician-Silurian mass extinction at 445 million years ago. There were tons of other extinction events, some possibly very fast, others really long like the oxygenation extinction from 2400 million years ago, and even the Big Five label is rather debatable in terms of real significance. This doesn't mean the asteroid wasn't a big deal, it's just coming to recognize that our early work in the field often found skeletons that weren't dinosaurs and assumed they were, and that we found a lot of other small critters from that era too, including small dinosaurs. After the Permian, our two major land animal clades saw the ancestors of mammals switch to strictly small sizes, while the ancestors of reptiles and birds produced both big and small. Before that, both size strategies, big and small, were pursued by both clades. And after that asteroid too, which we mark as the beginning of the Cenozoic or New Life geological era, 66 million years ago, the era we are still in. As a side note, the era before that, the Mesozoic, means middle life, and the Paleozoic means old life. And the Mesozoic is that era from 66 to 252 million years ago, when we see the small mammals and their precursors emerge out of the synapsids. Those ancestors, again, got big in that period before that in the Paleozoic, and grew again post-Dino in the Cenozoic. The Mesozoic is a period of nearly 200 million years, during most of which dinosaurs ruled the world. But as we are seeing, that might be a bit exaggerated, even if we were to contrast it by saying the Cenozoic was mammal-dominated. Nor were they or any other critters even vaguely static during that time. Most of the dinosaurs we know of were extinct before that asteroid, because 200 million years is a very long time. Fossils, especially complete fossils, are incredibly rare and tend to trick us into thinking they represent a very clear picture of huge timescales. We've never found a fully complete dinosaur skeleton, and the full dinosaur fossil collection, which is often just a handful of fragments from one critter, is in the low tens of thousands and includes, depending on who's counting, a couple thousand species or less. Keep in mind there are several thousand mammal species alive right now, and while the line on what is a species can get pretty vague and arbitrary, especially if you're limited to one or two partial examples of fossilized skeleton, that still means most dinosaur species are known to us from just one or two partial skeletons, and there are probably more dinosaur species we don't know than we do. And our knowledge of them is still very limited. That is no criticism of our scientists in that field. Quite to the contrary, it's flat out amazing how much they can deduce from so little evidence, but it means everything we know needs to be taken with a grain of salt, or possibly a dump truck worth of it. Dinosaurs were a big topic when I was a kid, and now too. My own kids love them, and I devoured every book our library's kids section had on them like a T-Rex at an all-you-can-eat buffet, but those books were written everywhere from the early 1950s to the present, the mid-1980s at the time, and you could definitely see the perspective switches as we learned more or other theories got dominant. There is a tendency to assume dinosaurs were slow and dumb, and that matters for asking what a Cenozoic period would have been like if more large Mesozoic-era critters had survived into that era. At the certain risk of irritating some biologists, I would say modern mammals have more overall survival advantages than dinosaurs did, and we, humans, are certainly smarter than them, but neither slow nor stupid particularly applies. Non-avian dinosaurs did have relatively small brains, and that's not the best correlation to actual intelligence as we discussed last month, but it is a decent metric when you have no other. As best as we can tell, their senses were not very accurate. Their temperature regulation or endothermability was subpar, and they weren't very good parents compared to modern mammals or birds. Another thing to remember is that virtually every ecological niche was wide open for refilling or competition at that point. Small mammals were able to fill a lot of those empty niches after the asteroid, including some like whales going into niches the dinos never even had, and since there were plenty of lizards and dinos of smaller size that would have persisted at least a little after the effective end of the world, they could have repopulated those niches themselves and presumably mostly failed to compete successfully for them. Again, mostly birds thrived, so did crocodiles. So while the notion of dinosaurs as lumbering dumb brutes is not really accurate, dinosaurs as terrifying threats really aren't either. Getting into a fistfight with a raptor isn't likely to end well for a human. But at the same time, the old sci-fi films showing one lone T-Rex smashing platoons of troops with assault rifles, and sometimes even bazookas and tanks, is just wrong. Anything that would get a modern elephant or bear would generally handle a dinosaur just as well. It is popular to compare this or that dinosaur to a mammalian predator of the same size, but it's mostly meaningless. We are trying to infer everything from a handful of fossilized bones. So who wins, a 1,000-pound dino or a polar bear, is going to be about as accurate as forecasting fights between the Hulk and Superman, or any other Marvel vs. DC fight, or how they'd stack up to a Jedi, or who would win between Doctor Strange or Harry Potter. We can compare modern birds to mammals in the same mass range, an ostrich versus a leopard for instance, or a cat versus a rooster. The cat is generally going to murder any rooster of equal mass, but they're not going to fight much because picking fights with things your own size violates the first rule of warfare. Always pick on people smaller than you. Doing otherwise just risks too much damage for a single meal. Pack hunters get around this. We know some dinosaurs did pack hunt, but we can't simply say pack hunting is superior since plenty of creatures in nature thrive just fine without using it. All of this boils down to the problem of not really knowing if mammals would have eventually filled those bigger slots if larger dinos had stuck around. We can't even rule out that all of them died then either. It would have been very easy for a few small groups of somewhat bigger ones to have survived for a couple million years afterward on this or that island, and we just haven't found their bones or fossils yet. Lost realms of surviving dinosaurs is another of those popular story ideas, the Savage Land from Marvel Comics being just one of many examples, though they're often rather anachronistic, mixing mammoths and saber-toothed tigers with T-Rexes. And in reality, we can't say that could not have been the case. Had that asteroid missed or been a bit smaller, or even just landed in the ocean and kicked up less dust, we may have seen a period of overlapping megafauna, both mammal and dino. And again, it wasn't just the large dinosaurs that died off. We may not have seen any mammal bigger than a rat immediately after the asteroid, but there were raccoon-sized mammals already around before that, they just died off too. And there could be bigger ones we just haven't found skeletons for yet, or even confused with the dinosaurs. There is much evidence indicating that mammal evolution had exploded and diversified prior to the dino die-off. Above all else, what the biggest, meanest predator is does not simply translate to ecological dominance of it, let alone all of its cousins. Niches undoubtedly opened, and the mammals clearly did better filling them, but that does not translate to mean the dinos could not have persisted and thrived had that doomsday been gentler or not occurred. Nor that mammals might not have risen in stature and scope anyway. Would the dinosaurs have gotten smarter though, gotten technological? Maybe. We shouldn't be assuming their small brains were some sort of eternal lock. Their avian cousins obviously managed to develop them at some point, and so did we. Primates hold a lot of the top slots for brains, but not all of them, and it would have been perfectly possible for smarter dinos to have popped up, albeit the heat regulation issue they have compared to mammals is not trivial. but there are other evolutionary strategies for handling that. And some argue that T-Rex, for instance, could have had even as many neurons as a baboon. We shouldn't even rule out that some might have been tool users, considering how often we found that ability outside of primates, even among birds and octopi. Paleontologist Dale A. Russell hypothesized in the 80s about the so-called Dinosauroid, a potentially intelligent descendant of the dinosaurs. His suggested evolutionary origin were troodontid dinosaurs such as the eponymous Troodon or Stenonychosaurus. Troodontoids are a family of raptor-like theropods that had almost opposed fingers and manipulative hands, as well as one of the larger brain-body ratios. While Russell's model of the intelligent dinosaur was criticized for being too humanoid, who knows? Convergent evolution is a thing, see our episode on the topic, and has led to some solutions in distant species such as hedgehogs and echidnas that, despite their similar appearance, do not share any common spiked ancestor. And of course, dinosaurs might have evolved intelligence even without a humanoid body form, manipulating objects with their snouts or beaks while sporting tails and feathers. And so we've seen science fiction where dinosaurs evolved brains and technology. Star Trek Voyager even made it canon for the franchise that Earth first gave rise to intelligent dinosaurs who left Earth on spaceships and moved to the Delta Quadrant. Not a great episode, sadly, and one of those ones that left me wondering how well the writers on the show got evolution themselves, albeit not as bad as the earlier Voyager episode Threshold. My personal favorite is a comic someone made that was set in the Mass Effect series showing technologically advanced dinosaurs fighting the Reapers unsuccessfully 65 million years ago. The Reapers are the big bad of that series and go around wiping intelligent life out periodically, for reasons that are rather unclear and better left that way probably. Could they have gotten into space? That is the notion implied by the episode's cover art, which also inspired me to write the episode when I saw the image. I can't see any particular reason why not, though it's worth noting that any number of other species besides us and dinos could have done that too had the cards been dealt a bit differently, as we've seen today with so many other players having been in the game at some point and so many mass extinctions taking place that a scenario like the Reapers can seem plausible. If they had evolved to our level and gotten successfully into space, then assuming our usual default notion that the galaxy is empty of other intelligence, and species were spread to fill that void at some modest fraction of light speed, then they would have populated the galaxy long ago, and likely much of our supercluster by now, to have achieved full grabby alien status. Nor is it hard to imagine the more avian dinosaurs getting bigger brains and a love of powered flight and spaceships. Indeed, there's no reason to assume they launched their first ship 66 million years ago. That would just apply in cases where we assume the asteroid was a false indicator of some other doomsday, like orbital bombardment from a rebel dino colony, or accidentally unleashing self-replicating kilmajigs that targeted any animal bigger than a rat. There are a lot of good stories, some more scientific than others, some more entertaining than others too, that examine the idea of advanced dinosaur civilizations, or us coexisting with dinosaurs. We may get to someday too. Jurassic Park's example of finding preserved DNA lacks realism, but we may be able to reassemble the DNA from educated guesses and existing examples in time as our skill at genetics and our fossil record improves. It would never be a complete match, but then even a flat-out clone of one of us isn't going to be a perfect DNA match for ourselves. And when talking about thousands of species of critters existing over many tens of millions of years, the notion of a perfect match doesn't really apply anyway. We've got crocs, we've got birds, we've got bones, or fossils anyway, and we've got imaginations and brains of our own. So we may resurrect our very distant cousins one day into real Jurassic Parks on new planets or fabricated rotating space habitats, and get to see how they evolve or even uplift them to have bigger brains themselves. So as we saw today, not only did dinosaurs not entirely die off, but they may return to life one day. I mentioned a moment ago that we might be able to make real Jurassic Parks one day. or other ancient habitats with more recent and readily available genetics, and then we might find this a good usage for terraformed planets or giant space habitats, in large part because then your dinos can't escape and run amok, at least not without a spacesuit. Whether it's as parks and nature preserves or more habitats for humanity, the key to building on new worlds, or building new worlds, which we'll be looking at more next week too, is ISRU, or In Situ Resource Utilization, making as much of your gear and supplies right there on that strange new world, so you don't have to ship it all in. In this month's Nebula exclusive, we will look at ISRU concepts and emerging technologies, challenges, and suggested solutions. In Situ Resource Utilization is out now exclusively on Nebula, our streaming service with a newly designed category-based interface where you can see every regular episode of SFIA a few days early and ad-free, as well as our other bonus content, including extended editions of mini-episodes and more Nebula exclusives, like last month's episode Machine Monitors, April's Galactic Beacons, Crystal Aliens from March, February's Tabopolis the Eternal River, January's Giant Space Monsters, December's episode The Fermi Paradox, Hermit Shoplifter Hypothesis, Ultra-Relativistic Spaceships, Dark Stars at the Beginning of Time, Life as an Asteroid Minor, Nomadic Minors on the Moon, Retro-Causality, and more. Nebula has tons of great content from an ever-growing community of creators. Using my link and discount, it's available now for just over $2.50 a month, less than the price of the drink or snack you might have been enjoying during the episode. Or even sign up for a lifetime membership to see all the amazing content yet to come from myself and other creators on Nebula. When you sign up at my link, go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur, and use my code, IsaacArthur, you not only get access to all the great stuff Nebula offers, like In Situ Resource Utilization, you also be directly supporting this show. Again, to see SFIA early, ad-free, and with all the exclusive bonus content, go to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur. Next week we'll explore the idea of hollow planets, both notions that Earth might be one, and that maybe it will become one in the future. Then we'll close the month of June out with a look at free will, quantum mechanics, and theories exploring the two might be linked. Then we'll head into July for a look at Roko's Basilisk, a strange acausal concept that might spell doom for humanity, and backwards in time. Then we'll examine a different pathway for humanity with a look at cyborgs and cyborg civilizations. If you'd like to get alerts when those and other episodes come out, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. You can also help support the show by becoming a member here on YouTube or Patreon, or check out other ways to help at isaacarthur.net. You can also catch all of SFIA's episodes early and ad-free on our streaming service Nebula, along with hours of bonus content like In Situ Resource Utilization at go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur. As always, thanks for watching and have a great week.